Hi everyone, today we're going to learn two agadatot, that is two stories from the Talmud. They're different, they appear in two different tractates, but they have much in common. They really talk about the same motif. And they're both stories about two sages who lived in Babylonia, but who decided against their master's will to make aliyah, to come up to the land of Israel and to move their life from the diaspora to the land of Israel. And they did so against their rabbi's wishes. So it's a very interesting story about immigrants and about the movement or the transition from the Torah of outside of Israel, Torah Chutz La'aretz, to the Torah of Eretz Yisrael, Torah of Eretz Yisrael. These two, the Torah divides between Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, and the rest of the world. And Eretz Yisrael is a holy land, and that's where the Beit HaMikdash is supposed to be. Now we're talking about the time of the Babylonian diaspora, so how the temple does not exist. But still, that's the idea, the vision, the ideal of the temple is centered, is situated in the very center of the concept of what Eretz Yisrael is all about. So Eretz Yisrael is called the Holy Land. And whereas the other countries are secular countries, so to speak. And when we're talking about people who live and study outside of Eretz Yisrael and then wanting to make this transition, we're really talking about a sort of movement or a transition between two completely different ways of studying Torah. And in Kabbalah, there's this distinction between the two intellectual sefirot. They're called Chokhmah and Binah. In English, it would be wisdom and understanding. And wisdom is considered higher or more connected to the essence of divine wisdom, whereas understanding is more like human understanding, the way we would understand things without having divine revelation necessarily. So the idea is that when one studies Torah in Israel, one is more connected to the sphera of Chokhmah, of wisdom. It said, Avira de Eretz Yisrael machkim, the air of Eretz Yisrael, of the land of Israel, makes one wiser, in the sense of wisdom. Wisdom is more general, it's deeper, it has to do with something that's more eternal, and more of something like coming out of this world and having a vision of wisdom. Whereas the opposite, the being in Babylonia or outside of Israel, symbolizes being connected more to the sphera of binah, of understanding. So the two Talmuds, we have two Talmuds Talmudim in Jewish history, in Jewish Torah study tradition. One is the Jerusalem Talmud and the other is the Babylonian Talmud. So the idea is that the Jerusalem Talmud, which is more concise and more general, that's more of a wisdom Talmud, Chokhmah Talmud, and the Babylonian Talmud is more of a binah, an understanding Talmud. And so that all has to do with this distinction, this difference between Eretz Yisrael and outside of Eretz Yisrael. Now, why are we doing this shiur now? We're doing this now because now we're in the month of Iyar, and we are now in the days in which the state of Israel was founded. These are days that are highly debated within the Jewish Orthodox world, with one position being that because the state is a secular state, then it shouldn't be the Day of Independence or the day of the foundation of the state of Israel shouldn't be celebrated as a religious holiday, with some going as far as saying lamentations on that day and saying that it's really a negative thing that happened in history. And the other side of the debate is the very opposite. It's the people saying that this is a holy event and a holy state, and it's a miraculous divine providence that we have this state. And it's a very heated debate for the even more than the 72 years in which the state of Israel exists. It's been debated, and every year it resurfaces in some other ways. And I think we can definitely agree, though, that looking more from a broad perspective, we can say that the fact that the return to Zion, Shivat Zion, has begun is, in all opinions, should be seen as something positive. Of course, it started long before the founding of the State of Israel, and it goes, we can say that the very first group immigration or aliyah to Eretz Yisrael began with Chassidut. It was the Baal Shem Tov who had the initial dream to come to Eretz Yisrael. He really tried actually to do so. And there are many stories, many versions of the story of why it didn't work out, why he was stopped on his way, en route to Eretz Yisrael, and he perceived it as a sign from above that the time wasn't ripe yet for him to make aliyah. He still needs to be in the diaspora and found his Hasidic movement over there, but he wanted to. The fact that he wanted to says a lot, and it also says that when you look deeply at what Hasidut is all about, Hasidut is really all about trying to regain or reawaken the spark of wisdom. We spoke about the Torah of Eretz Yisrael as the Torah of wisdom. Torah Eretz Yisrael is really the inner dimension of the Torah, Kabbalah, which then became Hasidut. The most prominent figure in modern Kabbalah is the Arizal, the Holy Ari, Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, and he spent the last two most influential years of his life in Eretz Yisrael, and also the one who preceded him, the Ramak, Rabbi Moshe Cordovero. So these two greatest sages of modern Kabbalah both lived in Eretz Yisrael, and their most important chidushim and teaching was in Eretz Yisrael, and that is really the beginning of Torah Eretz Yisrael. And Hasidut, which was based on Kabbalah, was really all about developing this Eretz Yisrael Torah, which is all about the Torah of going back to the body, going back to the land, going back to the most basic levels of the soul, we can say, sort of landing from an intellectual realm of just thinking about things and learning very intellectually to going back to the heart and the body and the emotions. It's really all of Hasidut is about coming back to the land of Israel. So that's why the Baal Shem Tov himself actually tried to come to Eretz Yisrael, but as I said before, he was stopped short, and it was sort of a sign that he's not supposed to happen yet. But then later on, 2 generations later, the first group aliyah, the first public aliyah, that wasn't just individuals, was the student of the Baal Shem Tov. He was Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Vitebsk, and he took 300 Hasidim with him and made aliyah against all odds. And they had a very harsh time. They lived first in Tzfat and then in Tiberias, Tveria, and that's where he's buried with all his students. There's a Hasidic section in the Tveria cemetery, and only later was the students of Agrav, the Vilna Gaon, made their aliyah, and of course later was the Zionist waves of immigration, the aliyot. So there is the fact that Shivat Zion has begun is something that is should be agreed. There's no reason not to agree that this is a momentous and positive event. And then regarding the kind of political system that was founded and the way it happened and the people who did it and the way they declared it in the Declaration of Independence, which was problematic in religious eyes because it very, very deliberately didn't mention the connection of the Jewish people to God or the existence of God. It was just, it found sort of compromise to mention it indirectly. And so all this is that's the object of debate. But the fact that Shivat Zion has happened, and then it was not just that, but it was during the month of Iyar, where we can see at least 3 major events that even without going into this debate regarding Zionism or secular Zionism, we can all agree are incredible that they happened in the same month. One was that the Vitebsk Rebbe that I mentioned, the leader of the 300 Hasidim who came to Israel, his Yortzeit, the date of his death, which is celebrated in Hasidic circles, was the first day of Iyar, right? It's a day that we all say Hallel, right? There's a big debate whether to say Hallel on the 5th of Iyar, but there's no debate about saying Hallel on the first of Iyar, because it's Rosh Chodesh. So, and he was all about Eretz Yisrael. That was his whole thing, was Eretz Yisrael. That's why he came here and he died here. And so that's the first of Iyar. And then, of course, the next two events are the fifth day of Iyar, in which the British left and gave us permission to rule. Again, the debate about what we did with this, but the fact that it happened is incredible, because it was an opportunity, at the very least, an opportunity to do what we will with this land, which we didn't have the opportunity before. And then the third event, 19 years later, was the reunification of Jerusalem, end of the 6-day war, and conquering of East Jerusalem, and reunifying the two sides of Jerusalem that was split in between for 19 years. And of course, part of East Jerusalem was Temple Mount. So these three events all took place in Iyar, and now they're celebrated now. So it's a good time to think deeply about what it means to transition from diaspora to Eretz Yisrael, especially the stories we're going to open up now have to do with this conflicting views. That one party, the rabbi here, says one shouldn't do aliyah, one shouldn't go, that's a more, we could say, so to speak, haredi approach, which means that the time isn't ripe to bring the redemption, to do aliyah. And two of his students disagree, and they do make aliyah. So, and what happens around this is a very deep, interesting thing to look at, and to think about, and see what it means regarding trying to go back to Eretz Yisrael in our generation in the fullest sense of the word. Right? In the fullest sense of the word means not just coming here physically and building a political system, but it means also coming here spiritually. And this also applies to people who are now, for the time being, Jews who are outside of Eretz Yisrael, like many of the people watching this. They're not in Eretz Yisrael, but they have the ability to connect to Eretz Yisrael spiritually. And it was a famous saying that in the I think it was the Maggid of Mezrich, student of the Baal Shem Tov, who said that wherever you are in the world, mach da Eretz Yisrael, make that place Eretz Yisrael. If you're connected to the divine wisdom, the chokhmah aspect, as opposed to just the binah aspect, then you can be connected to Eretz Yisrael even in the diaspora. So of course the ideal is that all Jews come to Eretz Yisrael, but again, coming to Eretz Yisrael is twofold. It's coming physically and coming spiritually. But also there's an aspect of Eretz Yisrael in the diaspora also. And it's said in the Talmud that in the future Eretz Yisrael will spread out and cover up the entire world, which means that all of the countries in the world, like America and China and South Africa and wherever it is, it has the potential to be Eretz Yisrael. The potentiality of Eretz Yisrael means that this aspect of wisdom can be tapped in any place. But still, again, the ideal is to do it here. So that's the whole background for the story. So now we're going to look at the first story and read it together. So the protagonist of the first story is Rabbi Zeira. He's an interesting character in and of himself. He's called, while in the Babylonian Talmud he's called Rav Zeira. In the Jerusalem Talmud he's called Rabbi Zeira. Right? If you're in Babylonia you're called Rav. If you're in Israel you're called Rabbi. That extra yud also alludes to the sphere of wisdom. So, of course, in English it sounds the same, but we just say rabbi. So this is, I don't have this is from Tractate Shabbat. And Rabbi Zeira was avoiding his teacher, Rav Yehuda. Why? Because he sought to ascend to Eretz Yisrael, and his teacher disapproved. As Rav Yehuda said, anyone who ascends from Babylonia to Eretz Yisrael transgresses a positive commandment. As it is stated in Jeremiah, they shall be taken to Babylonia, Bavela Yuva'u, and there they shall remain, veshama yihiyu, until the day that I recall them. Ad yom pokdi otam, said the Lord, said Hashem. So he interpreted this verse. Of course, it's a debate, but he interpreted this verse as saying, especially the words there, they shall remain there, veshama yihiyu, as saying that the Babylonian exile was a divine decree, and going to Eretz Yisrael is transgressing that, and we have to wait for the Mashiach, for the Messiah to come and take us. And of course we know that this was exactly the approach held by many, many Jewish Orthodox circles throughout the 2000 Edomite exile or diaspora, which is the one that's going on ever since the destruction of the Second Temple. So this is after the First Temple, but the same thing happened after the Second Temple was destroyed, and there was this view that the Rav Yehuda is the sort of epitome, or he's symbolic of this view, which is that we shouldn't actively try to. So he was sort of anti-Zionist, we can say. He was very orthodox, but he was anti-Zionist in the sense that he said, going back to Eretz Yisrael, we need to wait for Hashem to do this. But Rabbi Zeira is a kind of proto-Zionist. And again, I say Zionist. Zionism is associated with the secular version of Shivat Zion, but of course, we said it started with the Baal Shem Tov and his students, and then the Vilna Gaon and his students. So the Zionism in its essence, in its origin, is something very holy. It's going up to Eretz Yisrael. So Rav Yehuda is the proto-anti-Zionist, and Rabbi Zera is the proto-Zionist. So now Rabbi Zera has a dilemma. He wants to avoid Rav Yehuda because he's afraid Rav Yehuda would prohibit him personally, and saying, I decree that you cannot go there, and then it would make it harder for him. Maybe he wouldn't be able to do it at all, or he would have to not listen to his Rav. So he decides he wants to avoid him. On the other hand, what's the dilemma? So the dilemma is that it's still his Rav. He has much to learn from him, and just before he's about to leave to Eretz Yisrael, he needs to hear a final Torah message from his Rav. It doesn't matter that his Rav is sort of anti-Zionist, but he is more Zionist, or they have this disagreement. It's okay to have a disagreement with your Rav, but he's still your Rav, and you need a sort of farewell gift, right? He needs something to learn. That's the final thing that he learns. And now we'll see later on that this is the exact same opening of another story about a friend of Rabbi Zeira who made aliyah with him together, and they had the exact same beginning. They tried to avoid, but they wanted to learn something, and we're going to not compare, but we're going to look at what they learned as their farewell gift, and we're going to see that as sort of divinely teaching them something about this movement from outside of Eretz Yisrael to Eretz Yisrael, or from the Chutz La'aretz, the diaspora Torah, to the Eretz Yisrael Torah. So anyway, he says, I will go and hear something from him, and then I will leave. And I will go without him noticing me. I will just go, stand somewhere, and hear one thing, and that will be like, it will give me my aftertaste of my life in Babylonia, and the final Babylonian Torah that I learn. And with this, it'll even give me the strength to make my aliyah. It's almost as if he can't make aliyah on a completely irregular, sort of secular, earthly way or level. He needs to learn a Torah, even if it's a chutz la'aretz, a diaspora Torah. He needs a certain Torah idea, Torah vort, in order to make this aliyah a sacred act, or an act of also Torah. And it's fascinating that he's going to learn this Torah from a Rav who opposes coming up to Eretz Yisrael, but still that Torah is going to give the Zionist Rav the strength to make this movement. So he's really going to take a Chutz La'aretz Torah, a diaspora understanding Torah, and make it into a Eretz Yisrael wisdom Torah. Right? That's what's going to happen here. Okay, so I'm going to hear one thing, I'm going to hide somewhere and hear one thing, and then I'm going to leave. Now let's see what he learns. It's very, very interesting and very weird and deep. So it goes like this. Oh, I put the paragraph again. So I will go and hear something from him, and then I will leave. He went and found Rav Yehuda standing in the bathhouse. And he was hiding there somehow. And he said, he was telling his servant, he's with his servant. That's also interesting because it's going to be different from the other story. And he told his servants, bring me neter. Neter is kind of soap, natron. Bring me a comb. And he says these two things in Hebrew. Bring me neter, bring me a comb in Hebrew. And this is a big chiddush, as we'll see in a minute. Second thing he says is, open your mouth, because he's talking to, the first thing is said to his servants. The second thing he must be told to several other people who are there, maybe students. Open your mouth and let out air. Right? Of course, we have to understand all this. And the third is, and drink from the water of the bathhouse. Three mysterious things. I mean, they're not so mysterious. Bring me a soap and a comb. It's not mysterious. The other two are more mysterious. But why these three things, and what do they mean? And then the reaction of Rabbi Zera is even more interesting. He says, if I had come only to hear this matter from Rav Yehuda, tayenu, it would have been suffice for me. Would suffice for me. Wow, amazing. If that's the only thing I would ever have heard from him, from all of the things I've learned from him, maybe it's not what it means, but it definitely means it was enough just to hear that tiny thing, and now I can make aliyah, I can ascend to Eretz Yisrael, and I'm satiated. I got what I needed. So now, of course, we have to understand what these three things are, and they're actually explained in this Talmud page immediately afterwards. But I'm going to now explain it. We're not going to read it. I'm just going to explain it. So, from the fact that he said in Hebrew is the holy tongue, and they're in a bathhouse, and the fact that he used Hebrew to say, bring me neter, bring me a comb, there was a chiddush there. The chiddush was, it wasn't clear if you could speak the holy tongue, Hebrew, in a bathhouse. In a bathhouse, you're naked. It's not a holy place. And now, two things are clear. It's absolutely clear you can speak in Aramaic or in a non-Jewish, non-Hebrew language. Not in Hebrew. In any language you can speak, because it's all secular tongues. It's not a holy tongue. And there's absolutely no question that you can't say something that the content is holy in the holy tongue, because that's holy speaking. But there is a question: can you say something secular, a chulin affair, like a soap and a comb? Can you talk about this in the holy tongue? So that's sort of middle ground, and that's a big question. And the fact that he used the Hebrew tongue, the holy tongue, to say, bring me netel, bring me a comb, was a chiddush for Rabbi Zera. You can use the holy language to talk about unholy or secular, regular, mundane affairs in a place that's also mundane. Right? It's for sure you can, in a place that's mundane, you can't bring something that's completely holy. You can't open a Torah book and read. And for sure you can speak in a language that's not the holy tongue. But can you, in an environment of secularism, can you talk about secular things in a holy tongue? Turns out you can. That's the first thing he learned. And actually, let's explain it before we go into the other two things. What he learns from this, right? Again, this is his fuel to come to Eretz Yisrael. So what he learned was something amazing. He learned you can take secular affairs and elevate them into holiness. Now, this is really a Torah of Eretz Yisrael thing, because in the diaspora, it's a very, very secular environment. But then you have to completely isolate yourself from the secular environment. You have to have a Jewish neighborhood, and you need a bet midrash and a shul, a synagogue, and it's completely. And then you have this split. You're making a split there's the non-Jewish world, and then there's the Jewish world. There's the secular world, and there's the holy world. And you can't mix them, because if you mix them, you could get lost. But ascending to Eretz Yisrael means also trying, or making your contribution to bringing the redemption. And in the redemption, everything becomes holy. And everything is touched by the holy tongue, or is elevated by the holy tongue. And the fact that he learned this was no coincidence. It was something that he needed. Again, Rav Yehuda wants to remain in the diaspora. But Rav Yehuda, we need to know, loves Eretz Yisrael very much. It's not out of not loving Eretz Yisrael. He's a very holy man. But that's how he reads that verse that we said before, that we're not supposed to do it. We have to passively wait for the Mashiach. And Rabbi Zera wants to actively hasten the redemption. But this Torah is something very, very deep. That's really a redemption Torah, that you can take holy things, mundane things, and elevate them by saying them in the holy tongue, and that's creating this. Right? This is called chulin she'na'asu al taharat hakodesh, secular matters that have been elevated into the realm of kedusha, and this is really a major aspect of Torah of Eretz Yisrael, of coming to Eretz Yisrael, and really connecting the secular and the holy worlds. So that's the first thing he learned. Second thing, open your mouth and let out air. So we need here to learn the explanation for this. Really, what he meant was this: open your mouth and let the hot air of the baths fill you up. So then you can let out, not really air, because the word in Hebrew is hevel. Hevel isn't exactly air. Hevel is the water that's been heated. It's steam. Hevel is steam. So the idea is that it's really referring to sweat. The idea is this is like a sauna, and he says if you open your mouth and you let in the steam of the waters, it'll then help you sweat more. And this is the letting out. It's not really letting out air; it's letting out steam, so to speak, which is really your own sweat. So again, this is a very strange thing to learn and to be invigorated by. But again, it symbolizes something very, very deep. In the second day of creation, there was the water of the primordial waters, and God divided them into the lower waters and the higher waters. And they symbolize, higher waters symbolize Torah, divine wisdom, and the lower waters symbolize mundane wisdom, science, art, all the secular literature of the world. And the idea is this: how do the lower waters go up? By becoming steam. How do the higher waters go up? The very opposite. They exist as air, as clouds, and then they have to it's condensation. They have to become droplets and fall down. So this image of opening your mouth in order to fill it up with steam, and then through this sweat, through condensation, it's evaporation and condensation. So first there's the evaporation of the lower waters, the bath. They're evaporated, they become air. You breathe them in, and then you take your body takes this air and turns it through condensation to sweat. So the image is this: it's you can take the lower waters, mundane wisdom, art, science, etc., fill your mouth with it, learn it, eat it, right? Let it enter you, and then you can turn it into Torah. You can turn it by turning the evaporation is studying secular wisdom, and the condensation of putting out the sweat, it's like turning that secular wisdom into divine wisdom. It's very similar to the first principle, but in a different way. The first principle was it's higher, it's deeper. You can just talk about secular matters. They remain secular, but you can talk about them in the holy tongue. It's the first step of elevation. But then the second step of elevation is when you actually turn that steam the evaporated lower waters into like higher waters, but through condensation, that is turning it into Torah and bringing the Torah down here. So that's a beautiful image. Third thing is, drink from the waters of the bathhouse. And the explanation is, we're talking about drinking before you immerse in them. And why is that? The idea is explained that if someone goes to the bathhouse and heats himself from the outside, but does not drink from those waters, which is intended to heat himself from the inside, it's like someone cleaning an oven from the outside, but not cleaning it from the inside. So it doesn't help. And really, that's another very deep idea. It's saying heating is like cleansing, right? And if you don't drink from the water, you're only cleansing yourself from the outside. You're not cleansing yourself from the inside. And again, if you're in outside of Eretz Yisrael, physically or mentally, maybe it can suffice. If you're in a state of galut, of diaspora, you just do the external kind of rectification. But if you want geula amitit v'shlema, the full and true redemption, that it means going into your own hearts and cleansing yourself from the inside, that's the drinking from the water. So these are the three lessons that Rabbi Zeira learned from Rav Yehuda, which gave him the strength and the inspiration and the ability to make his aliyah to Eretz Yisrael. And what he did was really, he took the diaspora Torah, and by then filling himself up with it and going up to Eretz Yisrael, he transformed it into a Eretz Yisrael Torah. He transformed the Binah into Chokhmah. He transformed these ideas said by his anti-Zionist rabbi into his own Zionist, or Shivat Zion, return to Zion mentality, and he realized it in a deeper way, of course, because again, the full realization of Judaism is within the land of Israel. So that's the first story. Now, second story. This is about Rabbi Abba. So it starts exactly the same. Rabbi Abba was avoiding his teacher Rav Yehuda, as he sought to ascend to Eretz Yisrael, and his teacher disapproved, as Rav Yehuda said, anyone who ascends from Babylon to Eretz Yisrael transgresses a positive commandment. As it is said, as it is stated, they shall be taken to Babylonia, and there they shall remain until the day that I recall them, said the Lord. And he said, okay, I will go and hear something from him, just one thing, and then I will leave. And here the differences begin. It's a different story, different situation. This time, he doesn't find Rav Yehuda in the bathhouse, he finds him in the house of study. And not only that, but this time Rav Yehuda isn't speaking to a servant or to students, he's learning, listening to a Tana, that is, someone who recites the Mishnayot, the Mishnah segments of the oral Torah, which isn't oral anymore, it's written. And so again, we have in the history of, we just need the background, that in the history of the oral Torah, the two main stages are the Mishnah and the Gemara, or the Talmud. And the Mishnah was written in Hebrew, in Eretz Yisrael, and that's the basis, the foundation of all the oral Torah. And then in the Gemara, the Babylonian Gemara Talmud, was written in Aramaic and in the diaspora, in Babylonia. So really, even before we learn the content, just the image is amazing. It's almost like an approval for Rabbi Abba that he's going in the right direction, because he's finding his Amorah, right? With the Tanaim are the teachers of the Mishnah, and the Amoraim are the teachers of the Talmud. So he finds his Amorah teacher learning from a Tana, that is from someone reading the Mishnah. So it's a Chutz La'aretz Amorah Rav learning from an Eretz Yisrael Hebrew holy tongue Mishnah. So just this image of his Rav learning from the Tanaim who lived in Eretz Yisrael is almost like an approval, saying you're going in the right direction, because your teacher is again going up to Eretz Yisrael. But he gets all of his inspiration from the original Torah Eretz Yisrael, which is the Mishnah, written in Hebrew, written within Eretz Yisrael by the holy Tanaim of previous generations. So that's just amazing, just in and of itself. He's going there, and he finds the Tana reciting before Rav Yehuda. Now, that's without even going into the content. This time, he doesn't learn 3 things. He learns 1 thing. Well, we can say it's 2 things, because again, this image of Yudah learning from the Tanakh, from the Hebrew, Eretz Yisrael Torah of the Mishnah, is something in itself. But the content is 1 thing. So what does he learn? One who is standing in prayer and sneezes. So we use the word sneeze as, right, sneeze. But in the language of the Gemara, it could refer to 2 things, which is either a sneeze or gas from below. And this whole story was preceded by this debate of what happens when you sneeze when you pray. And they say that if it's an upper sneeze, that's how they call it, that's a good sign, because it's a positive experience to sneeze. It's nice. It gives you sort of, makes you become more at ease. And well, that we can say about the lower sneeze also, but it's a pleasant experience for you, and it isn't unpleasant for other people. It's just a sneeze, so that's okay if you sneeze. It's even a good sign if you sneeze as you're praying. But if it's a lower sneeze, that is gas coming from behind, that's a negative sign, and it's not a good thing. You have to stop. So this is what this idea is telling him. So if one is standing in prayer and for some reason he has gas, he has a sneeze from below, he should wait until the odor dissipates, and then, only then should he resume prayer. You're in the middle of your prayer, you're standing up, you have this, so you stop until you can't smell it anymore, and you continue. The 3 dots here are because there's another opinion that says that maybe you should even go back a few steps, wait for the odor to dissipate, go back to where you stood, and then continue praying. And then this Mishnah says, after this happened, since you stopped your prayer anyway, then before resuming your prayer, you should say another small prayer, just because you had this gas. And you should say, Master of the universe, you have formed us with many orifices and cavities. This we say, of course, every day, in Asher Yatzar, when we're coming out of the bathroom. Our disgrace and shame in life are clear and evident before you, as is our destiny with maggots and worms. So this, again, reflects another Mishnah, Dam ein bata v'le'an ata olech. Know where you came from and where you're going. You came from the seed, the semen of the father, which is odorous, and you find yourself b'makom afar rima v'tola'a. You'll be eaten by worms, and you should know that you should have lowliness, humility, and now we're saying our disgrace and shame in life are clear and evident. You know that we're just physical, and that we're going to end up just eaten by worms. That's what we are. So please, we should not be judged harshly. We're really, in a way, it's praying to God, but it's also reminding yourself that you're just flesh and blood, and you shouldn't be judged harshly or severely. You shouldn't be ashamed of yourself, the fact that you have this physical experience. And then he says, and then he should begin his prayer from where he stopped. And again, the Rabbi Abba's reaction is the same amazed reaction. Had I only come to hear this teaching, that would have been sufficient for me. And interestingly, he exposes himself to Rav Yehuda here. He says, because it says, Rabbi Abba said to him. That's another interesting difference. But again, we have to understand what happened here. So again, it just starts with the very fact that this is a Mishnah, and Eretz Yisrael Torah is very important. He's really beginning to hear, to smell the air of Eretz Yisrael. But the message within is also very deep, and it also teaches us another important thing about it. What does it mean to transform a diaspora Torah into an Eretz Yisrael Torah, or to advance from a diaspora, a galut, an exile mentality, to a redemption Eretz Yisrael mentality? It has to do with the relation to the body. The fact that one stops the prayer, we can see this, negatively, but we should also see this. We should really see this very positively. It gives the body room to be. Ideally, we should pray all day, but what happens if we can't pray? What happens if we we have indigestion? What happens if we have stomach ache? What happens if we have heartache? What happens if we're just feeding our body? We should stop and let our body be. That's really what he's saying here. Let the odor dissipate. Let it pass. It's okay. We're physical. We're all physical. And Dafka Eretz Yisrael is a holy. We said it's a holy land. It's a holy place, but it's also a land. It's where you land, where Judaism lands to the ground, and it connects to the body. And connecting to the body, you need to give the body its room and its time. You need to let the processes take place, and then the odor to dissipate. And then you should use this to have more lowliness and more humility. And then you're just reminded of what he says, disgrace and shame. It just means that you don't think you're an angel, don't think you're perfect, and we're all embodied in imperfect, weak, frail bodies, and we need to, have what's the word, chemla. We need to look at this kindly, and then the prayer is really about remembering this, that we're transient and temporal and physical and fragile, and don't judge us harshly, and we shouldn't judge ourselves harshly. And then the most beautiful thing is that we should think that the last line should be to resume, that after the person sends this short prayer, one should resume their original, the prayer that they're saying. But it doesn't say resume, it says begin. And then he should begin his prayer from where he stopped. And this is a tiny but very important. He's not resuming the prayer, because that would be the same old prayer. It's a new prayer. He's coming back to the prayer from a new place, because now he's more embodied. The first, when he prayed, he transcended his body. He forgot about his body, but then his body reminded him of itself, and by letting out that gas, and now he says, okay, my body is reminding me of itself. So I need to give this room. I need to go back to my body, because this is what Eretz Yisrael is all about. And then the more I remember that I am in a body, the more I remember how fragile and imperfect I am, and how I am liable to sin, and therefore how other people are also liable to sin. And then I remember that I wish not to be judged harshly, and therefore I shouldn't judge myself harshly, therefore I shouldn't judge other people who harshly if they are odorous or odious in some ways. They do things they don't smell good. But then if I remember my own fragility, I can also remember their fragility and frailness, and then I become less harsh with myself and with others. And then the prayer that I go back to, so I don't go back to the beginning, I do resume it from where I stopped, but it's not called resuming, it's called starting anew, because it's really a new prayer. It's a prayer that emanates from another place within me, a different place within me, that's more humble, that's more lowly, that's more connected to their body. And this is really the key to not being so harsh with other people as well. And maybe this is the reason that when Rabbi Abba sees Rav Yehuda learning this idea, he's able to, the opposite, when he came there, he meant to hide himself, right? He didn't want to be rebuked by his Rav, because he says, I have to go to Eretz Yisrael, and I know you disagree, so he was hiding. But the difference in the end line from the first story is that Rabbi Zera spoke to himself, but Rabbi Abba is speaking to Rav Yehuda, and maybe because he knows he's not going to judge him harshly when he's telling him, I'm so glad I learned this from you. Farewell. I'm going to Eretz Yisrael. So these are our two stories for this time of year and for every time of year, about this movement, this transition, this transformation, how to take a diaspora Torah, which is more spiritual but maybe more disconnected from earthly reality, mundane reality, although the diaspora is more mundane, But as I said before, the distinction is stricter. But coming to Eretz Yisrael, or making your place in the diaspora Eretz Yisrael-like, means making this integration, integrating the spiritual Torah with the physical, and also transforming the physical, the secular wisdom and ideas and language and concepts, elevating it into holiness. That's what these two stories told us, and may we all merit to take this and be inspired by this Torah, and to make our next step in our ascent. We're all ascending to Eretz Yisrael. If you're outside of Eretz Yisrael, ascending means making your life there more Eretz Yisrael-like, and then afterwards hopefully coming up to ascending to Eretz Yisrael itself. And for the inhabitants of Eretz Yisrael, the ascent continues. It's making Eretz Yisrael more of what it should be, what it's supposed to be, not just being here physically. You can be here physically, but mentally you can be in the diaspora. So may we take all these stories as inspiration to ascend from where we are to where we should be. Kol Tuv.